Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist podcast. Hey everybody, how's it going? Today I've got a pre-recorded segment that I recorded a couple days ago on a extended drive home. But first, I've got some calls regarding my last episode, so let's get into the calls first and see what we've got here.
Hey BJ, Jason here. Just want to call in on your latest episode, Emergent Backstory or Gameplay, or I don't know, I'm driving in the car. So, as far as your last point, and because I'm driving the car and you threw so much out, I'm sure I'll miss things. But if you did a recap at the end, I can't talk. I do that in my shows too. But anyhow, as far as revealing things about your character, telling stories about your character as you level up, that's right out of the Black Hack 2nd Edition. It's been a while since I've read the rules of Black Hack 2nd Edition, but I'm pretty sure that's part of leveling up is telling a story about your character. So, I do think that's doable. I played in over a year-long campaign of Black Hack, the 2nd Edition, and it worked very well. So I'm a big fan of that kind of idea. I'm also, like you, a big fan of Emergent Backstory. I don't like writing backstories for my characters ahead of time. I very much like them to develop as I play. What else? You covered a lot of stuff there. I don't know. So, I've played in games where the GM rolled randomly and developed. So, we all met. The players rolled their characters up and made their characters, and while they were doing that, the GM rolled randomly and generated the scenario, and then we played it out. I played in games like that. I don't know that I played in a game where the GM just randomly rolled as we went. I think that would be a little more difficult. It's 100% doable, don't get me wrong, but I don't know. My standard storytelling technique or gameplay technique, I guess, doesn't count as storytelling. It counts more close. It's definitely emergent. Is I'll come up with a world and the factions and the people in there, like you said. They'll have things that they're going to do, like those characters in Westworld, and then I'll throw the players in, and usually I'll give the players an inciting incident. But we just go from there. I don't have solutions in mind. It's up to the players to decide what they want to do, and if they're going to go after something, then, if what they do makes sense, then, it'll probably work. And if it doesn't, then who knows? But ultimately, the dice will decide. So, yeah, I think that kind of game works very well. I'm not so sure about rolling as you go, but I'm sure you could do it. Procedurally generate as you go, without a doubt. With my solo play that I'm not talking about a whole lot, probably not going to talk about a whole lot, I've got an overarching idea where the character has a revenge thing, and so he's traveling place to place to get revenge. But aside from that and some basic ideas, it is pretty freeform, but there is kind of a meta ultimate plot where he's got to go place to place to get revenge, just to give me a framework and let me use a map that I want to use, and then I'm riffing off that map. So, but I'm kind of making it up as I go, as he goes to each location on the map. Let's see. There are other things you mentioned I want to hit, and I don't remember what they were now, so I might have to re-listen to your episode. As far as backstory, working backstories in, I don't usually generate adventures around characters' backstories if they give me backstories. I generate the adventure, players bring their characters, and is what it is. If I can work it in, I will. I ran a Barbarians of Lemuria game a while back where the players had made their characters. We had the adventure, the base idea of the adventure. They're getting hired to go to this place and get this thing was kind of already laid out. They took the job. But then what we did is on the way, because I had to travel quite a ways to get there, we worked in each session. We worked in a session kind of where each character was a focus character. So something from their past came back, or maybe we did a flashback or something like that. and that way each character did get kind of like a spotlight session, except maybe Carl. I think Carl's character didn't get a spotlight session, unfortunately, but I think the other characters all did. So that you could do something like that, and that works. But I'm not a big fan of people rolling up characters, come with a backstory, and then the GM creating the adventure around those backstories. In the latest Barbarians Lemuria game I'm running, I set the game up, but because we're in an area that one of the characters was in before, I was able to work in that the Thieves Guild kind of held a grudge against him, and so we played that out, and now he's kind of worked that out because he passed the test and proved himself to him. But that wasn't predetermined. It was just the fact that he happened to be in that area, and I could pull that part of his backstory out. But I didn't plan on that when when we started playing. It just kind of came out because he was in that area before in his backstory, so we were able to fit that in. So I don't know. This is long and rambling, and I will let you go. But good to hear you back on the air, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you for the call, Jason. Everyone, that was, of course, Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Um, they say when an elder dies, a library is lost, and I think, not that I'm in a hurry for anything bad to happen to Jason, but if we were ever to lose Jason, we lose someone who has a very broad knowledge of different role playing game systems and what's involved in them, what they do, what they don't do, where they come from, and I think I can always count on Jason when I've got an idea to help me know if it's an original idea or if I just kind of stumbled into something that someone else has already thought of. So it's good to know that's in the Black Sword hack. I've kind of thumbed through the Black Sword hack a couple times, um, but I've never really played it or gotten heavy into it. So I had forgotten that was in there. So I have my copy of the second edition of the Black Sword hack. It is indeed on page 13. Share your experience. In order for a character to share their experiences, they must go carousing and regale their companions in revelry with stories of their exploits and growing renown. A player who wishes their character to share experiences must first tell a story, tell the other players one very short story from their character's past over a round of drinks or toasts for each experience they wish to share. So one round per experience. The player should roll a d6 for each story told. This is the cost in coins that must be paid for the accompanying drinks and feasting accompanying the sharing of the story. If they don't have the coin, the GM will determine the amount of debt they owe and to whom. Wow, that's fun. And then find the highest result rolled on any of the d6 and consult the carousing table. So you can get things like drunken disorderly, you get fined. Drunken brawl, you get in a fight. Fame, charisma tests have advantage for the remainder of the session. Revelry, roll it down, roll a d20. If it's higher than your charisma, you gain a point of charisma. Cool. Uh, real story, alter your background, so this now becomes a real story about your background. Or if you roll a 6, secrets revealed, gain another entirely new background. So you've sort of revealed that you aren't who you said you are, I guess, on that. So that's a pretty cool idea there. So in the Black Sword hack, you're not gaining experience points so much as you're gaining experience. Um, uses an abstract system of experiences to measure a character's development as they adventure. So maybe a little not exactly what I was thinking of, but sort of in the same vein. So thanks for reminding us that, Jason. And yeah, I think you and I probably share some similar preferences on our aesthetics for how to make a character and how to develop them over time. Um, yeah, I don't know. You're talking about never seen it done procedurally at the table. Neither have I. I think I played around with it for 20 minutes or so with Carl about a year ago when we were at a con, but then we moved on to another activity before we could really see it through. But yeah, I think it would be a little more of a board gamey aspect if the DM is using some kind of cards or tables or something and dice to just procedurally generate a dungeon or a point crawl or something like that. Um, so it certainly would probably be a little slower and would not probably lend itself well as to really being immersive, but it might. You never know. Uh, but certainly, yeah, using randomized things to sort of create the scenario beforehand is a kind of a time honored tradition, I guess. Anyway, thanks for the call, Jason. I sure appreciate it. Always good to hear from you. And let's see who we have on the caller list. Caller list. I was gonna say who we have on the phone, but it's not really a phone. It's just digital voice messages people have sent me. So, but let's see who's next.
Hey BJ, Carl here. Good to hear you again solo on the Arcane Alienist, though you're kind of everywhere, which is great, I think. Yeah, let's do last things first for the points that I gleaned from your podcast, which was really cool. I do enjoy emergent play, and I think that to me was typified at North Texas RPG Con, but I will get to that. First thing, I'm going to take your idea for emergent character story. I think when have people introduce their characters, I'm going to say, give me some fact about them that we don't know yet, especially when we record, because that's kind of cool, and I think we should promote that. So next thing, I kind of ran an experiment. A lot of the characters talking about story emergence and emergent play. A lot of the characters that I created and made pre-gens for were sort of no names and gender neutral or genderless, and it was kind of cool to see how people developed them when they wanted to roll random names. For example, like we did in the Song of Roland, they picked the characters and they made them their own, and they had like little. I gave them little secrets in my Hyperborea game, and they really held on to those to kind of give them like a story, a backstory in a way in that small time frame of the 3 to 4 hours that we play. And I think that was really cool. And I think, like I was saying on the group podcast, I think, other than hanging out with you guys and getting to play with you guys, I think the Hyperborea was my favorite because it was less of a point crawl like the others. Apologies. I think in the future, if I had time to develop, I would have made like the Song of Roland more of like a hex crawl. Maybe there's still time or a chance to do that at some point. But and then the other one was just like a mountain crawl. But Hyperborea, the Hyperborea game, both, right? So both the dungeon crawl you missed, they could have gone anywhere. They had many choices. And then the game that I ran, the Shadow of the Wizard, they had a choice after the initial event to go in any direction that they wanted to go, and I think that made the story emerge. And I thought what was very cool is, as I was setting up for one of my other games, I heard some people talking about it and telling, like you said, that sort of story about the game, about their character, and how one character who had, because right, the end result was like 2 characters were dead, 2 characters were down, and 2 characters survived and were able to beat the bad guy in the scenario, or a bad guy in the scenario. And they were talking about it and how that happened. And I thought that storytelling that emerged from this type of gameplay was very cool. Sorry if all my anecdotes are about my games, but I don't have raw data, and that is the only data that I have. So take care, Dr. Boyd, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you, Carl. That was Dr. Carl Rodriguez, the GMologist Presents YouTube and podcast. Frequent collaborator on, well, I think I'm more like a frequent sidekick for Carl on his, some of his live play games on YouTube and occasionally on his podcast. But yeah, I think you and Jason are both echoing sort of the idea of creating a scenario and letting the players decide what they're going to do, and then the story emerges. And if you look back on it, of is there a plot? Is there maybe, but it's sort of most of the time when we read a novel, I know the author works to create sort of a coherent, interesting, engaging plot that has some consistency and some callbacks and some foreshadowing and all this really stuff that goes into writing. But at the end of the day, maybe every story we tell, even about things that happen to us in our real life, there's a plot there. Just we didn't know what the plot was until we stopped and looked back and said, "What just happened?" Maybe I'm getting a little too philosophical here. Although, if you don't like, yeah, if you want philosophical, I got something else coming up for you in the last segment. But yeah, but again, yeah, thanks for the call, and I think you're right. And we had some that Pendragon game. That was I've been telling that story for forever. My we were all it's the Pendragon rules, but instead of playing Knights of the Round Table, we're playing gunslingers in the Dark Tower universe, and in the in the set prior to the novel The Gunslinger, when there are still actual multiple gunslingers basically functioning as knights in the setting, and it worked really well. And then it was I guess the really cool story that emerged out of that was I just happened to pick the character that was kind of the biggest and strongest of the pre-gens. Um, and so we spread out to explore this abandoned town, and lo and behold, a demon jumps out of a well uh, for my character, and I tried to spend some passion to enhance the effect, because I'm basically shooting a 45 revolver at a demon, even though it is a gunslinger's gun, but botched it completely, and just the way the dice fell, my character fell into a bout of madness, but also just obliterated this demon with his gun. But then we got to wait for my madness to pass, and again, just sort of between the dice and the scenario, it just what comes is this character who's now, none of these compatriots want to shoot him, obviously, but he's sort of in this kind of permanent sort of battle rage, and they've got to figure out how to calm him down before he hurts himself or someone else. And it was just funny because it's like, well, what are you going to do? He's bigger and stronger. This guy will um, will we're not going to take him in a fist fight, and we don't want to shoot him and hurt him for real, because this is our brother in arms. And it was just a really fun to watch the other players, and even though I was kind of minimally role playing at that point because this had happened to my character, to watch the other characters sort of problem solve. And then I think at one point, one of them had to shoot a pistol, my spare pistol out of my hand, so that I didn't shoot, you know, yet another one of the party, and then running around, on horseback with me on foot, trying to tire me out. And I think finally they managed to rope my character and tie him down until the madness passed. But it was funny, and it was engaging, and it was entertaining, and it would fit perfectly with the genre. So, but those are the kind of stories you get, which that was not part of the plot at this point. Some one gunslinger will go mad and do this. That completely emerged out of the scenario based on what happened and which character decided to do what. Anyway, thanks again, Carl, for the call. We've got one more here to listen to.
Hey BJ, this is Merck. Just listened to your latest episode, your reflections on Che Webster's and Anthony Boyd's no relation conversations, and enjoyed what you had to say. I agree that Octonauts is a decent show for adults to watch with their kids. That was one of those shows that I could tolerate watching with the girls when they were younger. Another one, not that anyone's asking for it, but another one was Backyardigans. I enjoyed that. Yeah. Anywho, let's get into some actual gaming stuff here. Discovering the character in play versus coming up with a large backstory. I tend to, at least now, I tend to agree with you. In the past, I might have been more apt to create long backstories, but I don't know if this is an actual golden rule or not, or if this is just something I'm pulling out of my rear end. But my philosophy as of late is play the game the way you would want your players to play in your game. And it's probably some OCD control tendencies in me, but I don't want my characters to come up with massive backstories and like insert their own lore into the world that I'm creating, unless it's I already have the understanding that it's going to be a collaborative world building type of thing. So if I don't want that for my players to do to me, then I don't really want to do that to whoever's reffing for me. So I tend to be very minimalistic in what I'm creating for my backstory. I tend to just rely on either having some kind of personality in mind or rolling for a personality and just running with it and seeing where it goes. Like you're saying, discovering it in play. You also talked about like randomly generating terrain, and you mentioned the sandbox generator. And I just want to mention my own thing here, not because I think it's I'm not trying to promote myself too much here, but I figure the ladder terrain generator is also a good tool for creating hex maps that are cohesive. And that's one value I have. And you mentioned wondering if people are interested in like randomly creating terrain and then randomly creating a dungeon. And one thing that takes me out of a certain level of immersion is random rolls that just don't make some sense. I know things aren't going to make complete sense, but if it's too far out there with the randomness, then that can be kind of jarring for me. So the ladder terrain, it tends to make more consistent terrain hex maps. So that's kind of why I prefer that system. And I guess if you're trying to generate a world randomly and then curating it for then being able to play with like a group or something, I would be more inclined to do that. I love discovering what refs have in the world, and it's harder to feel like you're finding out something cool if it's just being randomly generated. I would love to be able to do that, and it's cool to take disparate elements and make a narrative out of it, as you were saying, like that story generation as opposed to story creation. So I think I'm on the same page with you on a lot of things, but I don't know where I'm going with this, honestly. If this message is too long, let me know. Anywho, I'm going to stop rambling now, and thanks for the episode, and take care.
Thank you for the call, Merc. That's Merc the Meek, another great podcaster in our community. Be sure and check out his stuff. And I will put a link. He sent me the link to specifically to download a terrain generator that he uses, that he's created, that he mentioned. But I'm going to put a link to his itch.io page in general because it's pretty easy to find that just if you go to his itch page. But he's got some other really cool stuff there. So check out both his podcast and some of the stuff he's put up on Itch for use in your role playing games. And yeah, Octonauts it was one of the ones where even my kid would fall asleep and I'd be like, okay, I'll take him to bed, but first I want to see how this episode ends. Octonauts rules. All right. Yeah, so I think some more great comments there about just using procedures and using scenarios and letting don't get in the way of the process. Let the game play out, and it'll give you something you didn't expect, something that's be surprising and something really a lot of times better than you could have done if you'd forced it. Um, and I get some people prefer the other style of play, so and that's not to bash the other one, but I think I think as Che has pointed out in his reflections that kind of got me uh, on this topic in his conversations uh, with Anthony on Role Play Rescue. That I think his concern is not so much that there are other ways of playing role playing games, but there is a way of playing this kind of play to see what happens, play the world um, to you know just see what emerges. That's kind of being lost as we move to these sort of overly developed, overly detailed, um, kind of particularly lengthy, particularly the way Paizo and Wizards of the Coast does these adventure paths, where certain things have to happen for the next installment to to make sense, and so it's not being built out one chapter or one episode at a time. It's there's a there are signposts you have to hit along the way in order to get from the beginning to the end. And it's not that you can't improvise and everything works out exactly the same in adventure path style adventures, but that I think Che's concern is that that's become the dominant way of looking at it, and we've started to define role-playing games as storytelling games. And words mean something. When we use that term storytelling game, as opposed to a story-generating game or a you know adventure game of imagination that inevitably produces a story just naturally as a byproduct, or as an epiphenomenon is a term I like to use. Um, we've kind of lost. There are going to be people who might enjoy playing it that way who don't realize that you could do that if that conversation dies. Um, so, yeah, great stuff all around. Again, thanks to all three of the callers: Merc the Meek, Carl Rodriguez of the GMologist, and Jason Connerly of Nerds RPG Variety Cast. All right, so we'll move on to this segment that I've recorded. I'm just going to let it play out to the end. So listen, if it inspires you to ask any questions, provide any comments, as always, you can. The contact information is in the show description, but you can email me. You can get to me through SpeakPipe. You can find me on the Audio Dungeon Discord to message me directly. But here we go. Oh, and as always, um, take care of yourself and make someone happy today.
All right, I'm on kind of a little bit of a drive home in the evening. I had the day off. It's as I'm recording this, it's the 19th of June, Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth, everybody out there. It's not going to be June 19th when I get this published, but I hope you observed it and remembered it. When it was here a few days ago, as of the time I probably am going to publish this. Anyway, I've had the day off. I drove into Oklahoma City to my family's wife and son went on a little road trip. I've got work tomorrow and I'm actually working through the weekend because I'm helping with a online professional conference that I have to be a part of. So they decided to take a little road trip to New Orleans because my son had never been there, and I had the day off, so I drove into Oklahoma City and visited a couple of fine comic book establishments and game stores. Shout out to Wizards Asylum and to DM Dave in his spot, both in Norman, not Oklahoma City. Anyway, I'm just driving back and had some thoughts, and maybe I should get to the point that kind of struck me. And I guess let me start with a question. Have you ever been in a game with a dungeon master, or maybe at some point in your career as a dungeon master or game master, you've been this guy, with someone who so rigidly applied the rules, just inflexible? Like, there are always cases. The reason we have game masters is because even when you have procedurally driven or really crunchy games, there's always a time where you just sort of go, that didn't make much sense, or this doesn't seem to really apply here. This doesn't seem to make just to follow the standard rule. We need to have a tweak it a little bit, maybe not in a permanent house rule, but just, hey, this isn't really covered in the rule book, or there's a rule that kind of addresses this, but there's the context or the situation is kind of unique that maybe it's not adequate. But someone just couldn't break free of the rules. Or I can remember an example once where I was with a dungeon master who had misread a rule, but would not entertain the notion that they had misread the rule, and it was really kind of making things more difficult for the players than should have been. Yeah. But anyway, someone who just so rigidly follows the rules, regardless of whether everybody's having a good time or whether it's, not even independent of good time, it's just when it maybe just doesn't make sense. So what am I going to get at? Well, I'm going to divert into my professional life a little bit. As many of you know, my life away from gaming, I'm a psychologist. Have been for 23 years now. Wow. Anyway, and of course, before I was a psychologist, I was training in psychology for a few years. So, but something that I started reading a book. And this book, if anybody's interested in it, is called Process-Based Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. For anybody, I don't know why you'd read it if you aren't actually a mental health professional, but it's an interesting read, at least so far. I've kind of skimmed through it, and I just started my kind of standard read of it, this afternoon while I was sitting, waiting on my lunch. But the idea behind this book is that, so when therapy, was researched and developed. Of course, therapy's been around for a long time, going all the way back to Sigmund Freud. But there are different schools of therapy over the years, lots of different approaches to therapy based on lots of different theories of the human mind. But cognitive behavioral therapies try to generally build their techniques off what science tells us about the human mind. So it draws from basic behavioral science, cognitive science, neuroscience to create models of the human mind and therefore models of mental illness based on how the human mind actually seems to work. And then develop psychotherapy techniques that reflect that, so that you're not using some pseudoscientific or some disproven or poorly supported model of the human mind, because then you're just going to dig yourself in a hole, if you're not. That's the idea. It can sometimes be hard to pinpoint that, because we know psychotherapy itself has some non-specific benefits regardless of the type of therapy. So there's just something about going and talking with someone who listens and seems to care and helps you kind of talk through things. There's a little bit of a benefit from that, or there's actually a good benefit from that, and it's actually a necessary condition for therapy to work at all. But then therapy does so much better when you can then put in specific techniques, that are grounded in, a functioning or a real useful model of the human mind. So, and I could. That's an entire graduate level course. So hopefully that's good enough for the point I'm getting to. And we'll get back to gaming in a minute, but it's just a juxtaposition of two parts of my life that just sort of clicked for me today. But this book is about what we call process-oriented approaches to therapy. When we want to research a new type of therapy or a new application of an existing type of therapy, what we'll do is we'll create a very specific type of protocol. And there's usually a manual, and all the therapists who work in the study will kind of learn the manual in detail, and it is very, very scripted and very straightforward. X number of sessions, and we'll usually even have sometimes even session 1 focuses on this, session 2 focuses on that. And because we're controlling a lot of the variables that could create a confound. If we really want to know if therapy A works for depression as well as therapy B or better than therapy B, we really have to have this very rigid, standards of how we apply it and who can be in the study. And, if we're treating depression, we want them to be just depressed and not have some other kind of serious mental illness on top of that, or an addiction or something, just so we can cleanly see how does the therapy under study affect the problem we want to see, how we want to treat. That's not very realistic for how the real world is, but that's how that's the basic research does that. And then from there, what happens is through replication and tweaking and stuff, you kind of perfect it. And then you can start to back off of that rigid protocol and be a little more flexible with it. Once we're sure the underlying principle is sound, there's some room for variation, some room to tweak it a little bit. What happens often, though, is people who get trained to do therapy just learn the treatment manuals. Psychologists sometimes fare a little better than other types of therapists in this, because to be a psychologist in most practicing call yourself a psychologist as a practicing mental health professional, you have to have a doctorate in psychology. And so that affords us, in addition to the training and how to do kind of therapy and the treatment side of things, we're still getting that you know the underlying, like the PhD, the philosophy, the underlying training in how the human mind works, so that we have kind of that theoretical knowledge, as opposed to just knowing how to, this looks like depression, so I'm going to pull, manual XYZ off the shelf because this is the treatment protocol for depression. And, hopefully it'll work, right? So what this book is trying to do is it comes from a task force from the Association for Cognitive Behavioral Therapies, wanting to better train students in psychology on how to understand why cognitive behavioral therapies work and make sure that they have that deeper understanding, and we're connecting the theory and what the science tells us about the human mind with the way we implement psychotherapy. But I think by extension, the book is probably a good tool for other therapists who maybe haven't had that training, or maybe like myself, I had that training, but it's been years since I kind of just went back to the basics and made sure I was kind of, you got to drift a little bit when you get out of school and are on your own, and kind of, you kind of have to always have those check-ins, so continuing education and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm getting off on another tangent. But the idea here is for, as a therapist, you need to have that deeper understanding of the basics of the human mind and human behavior, because you're not just supposed to follow a protocol and hope that what comes out at the end is success. You're supposed to be looking at how the protocol is working in the moment, day to day, session to session. And then if you have understand the theory about why it works, you understand when you can sort of break the rules, when you can break the protocol. This is the idea of why this therapy works for depression or anxiety or an addiction or whatever the case may be. But because I understand the theory behind that and what's actually going on in the human mind as we're applying it, if we seem to get stuck, I can back up and go, wait a minute, why is this not working? Let's go back to the theory. Maybe I've misapplied something from the way the treatment generally is implemented, or maybe that there's some other confounding reasons that you don't get in those treatment studies, because this person isn't just depressed, they've got anxiety as well, or they've got another problem. And so what do I do? Well, I change the protocol. I make a decision based on my understanding of the underlying process that drives that protocol or that procedure to, change it a little bit. Hey, this, I think here's the reason this isn't working for you. I'm going to shave a little piece of this. Here's a normal part of the protocol. We're just going to drop that. Or, you know what? In my work with people who have the other problem you've got, say, maybe it's anxiety, here's what tends to work. So I'm going to braid that in to what we've been doing for the depression and try to get at both problems, in a coordinated fashion. I hope that's making sense to everybody. So there's a little kind of window into the world of psychotherapy and psychology, clinical psychology. Just to wrap that up before I move on to the real point of the podcast, which is role-playing games. If you're looking to get into therapy, need therapy, to be a good consumer of therapy, you might want to be informed enough to say, hey, what kind of therapy do you do? And what's the science behind this? What's the research behind this? Just to make sure you got somebody who kind of understands why what they're doing, why we do what we do, and when to scrap it and go back to the drawing board, when to shift gears, or when to just nudge things one way or the other, right? So the point is, I think you want the same thing out of a good game master. When I think of taking what I know about psychology and deciding I'm going to change the protocol for treatment, that's kind of like making a ruling as a game master. And I think that's why it's good for game masters eventually. I mean, everybody's got to start somewhere. And if you have your game and you're having fun and your friends are having fun, great. But I think what a lot of us who've been around a long time and who've played multiple games and who have done comparisons and comparing and contrasting different games, and talking with other game masters about the games we like and don't like, and rules we do like and don't like, and what our house rules are, what you're seeing is this idea that I'm going to make a ruling. I don't think, here's what the rule book says, but I don't think it applies in this situation. I think this is sort of either a corner case where the rules don't speak to it cleanly, so I'm going to tweak the normal rule a little bit. I'm going to throw this rule out and just come up with something else. You can do that. But you're making a ruling. But one thing that comes, the ability to make that kind of ruling, you get better at it the more different games you play, and the more you at least play the games as written, rules as written, a little bit until you understand the rules, and then you can start to see, okay, here's how I can kind of riff on that. Here's how I can tweak that a little bit. Or once you've played multiple games, here's where I can kind of pull in a rule, adapt a rule from another game that kind of works here for this. But that's a lot of the idea behind rulings overrule is the game master will just say, if nothing else, I'll tell you what, we're going to roll a die. It's a six-sided, and the old school way of doing it would be with a six-sided die. Say, this is a task you've never done before. I'll give you 1 in 6 chance because this isn't something that's in your wheelhouse. Or, this is something you might be better than most people at, so I might give you a 2 in 6 or a 3 in 6. Or, maybe it's something you should be really good at, so I'll give you a 4 in 6. It's just that sort of simple ruling right there. I think in modern sort of D20 games, we would just say, here's the ability, here's the ability that applies the most there. There's no clear, you don't have a skill or other kind of thing that would speak to it, so just make a strength check, make a dexterity check, make an intelligence check. And I think that's the idea of these core mechanics, really understanding kind of what they mean and why they're there. Because once you understand the principle behind what is that? What is an ability check? What is a skill check? Are they in the game I'm using? Are they separate or do they combine? What does that mean? What's the game theory behind that? What is this game system designed to do? If I understand the principles at work or the process at work, then I can make a ruling, and I'm not stuck with rules and just hoping that we don't come into the situation where the rules don't cleanly apply, because you do find those, and I think that's the impetus of the whole idea of the war cry of rulings over rules, which it is actually even there in kind of our more crunchy modern games like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Very much had a ruling over rules. You may not see that when you look at the complexity of it compared to something like original D&D or some of those older games, but when you compare it to like 3rd edition D&D, 4th edition D&D, Pathfinder, there is fewer rules and more guiding principles of here's how you would apply an ability check or a saving throw to resolve a situation, absent anything else. But if you understand enough about dice and how dice mechanics work, and have seen them work, different dice mechanics work in other games, once you understand those principles, you can go off that. You can say, you know what, I know we're playing a 5e version, which is based in the D20, and the default is to just figure out the ability and go and roll a D20 and go from there. But if you know enough about other stuff, you might bring in a 6d6 mechanic or a 2d6 mechanic or a dice pool mechanic or something like Arsonian dice, which nobody knows exactly what those were because Dave was apparently a terrible record keeper. But we have some ideas about what it's kind of like. We're just going to add a die. Each side's going to have a die pool, and for every kind of advantage or resource brought to the table, we're going to add another die in there. I think that's how it works. To me, it kind of reminds me kind of like just the way you dice off at risk, right? At any rate, if you understand the principles of how dice pools work versus single die mechanics versus the addition of modifiers versus using advantage, disadvantage. Whatever you're doing, if you understand the principle, you can come up with a pretty good, fair ruling instead of just being a slave to the printed word in the rule book. Anyway, just a thought. I was kind of contemplating. I'm working on a project of work to try to help the staff I work with. That's why I'm reading the book. Deepen their theoretical understanding so that they can improve their skills as therapists. Although most of the people I work with are really good therapists anyway. There's always ways to get better, constant improvement, right? But it just struck me that was real similar to the way game masters over time develop a deeper understanding of what's behind the rules, what's behind the die rolls and the tables and all that, and what sort of gets you to the point of being able to really, really do a good job of making rulings when you understand that, but you also understand the rule set you're working with and what it's good for and what it's not good for, and when to apply it, when to not apply it, when to adjust it. All right, well, that's a long enough driving rant. I'm getting close to home. Sun's also going down, so I should probably turn off even though it's hands-free, I should probably stop recording and make sure I'm paying attention to the road. Okay, well, I don't know. This will probably be one segment of another episode, so thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art is by Dave Bone. Be sure to check out his stuff at ironseer.com. You can leave me a message. I have my SpeakPipe account linked to the show description. You can also send me an email at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Just embed a voice memo, or I'll just read the text to your email during a future episode. Once again, thanks so much for listening.